Well, this has sure been a month, to say the least. And with that, we should talk about the fact that this video has changed multiple times. But anyway, we need to talk about this map. And specifically, I need to talk about why and what happened to this map online. It basically went viral. There's more to it than just a quick one-off joke or opinion. So let's talk about that. Plus, I actually made a new version of the map that's updated and is a little bit more detailed and more funny in some ways. So I will show that later on in the video. This entire conflict in Iran and the Strait of Hormuz is about oil. Even though we are being led by the dumbest man of all time, who is a huge moron with dementia, it's still about oil. So after World War II, a lot changed. Our country came back from the war. We had a lot of manufacturing. We had a lot of prosperity because we were one of the only countries with sustainable manufacturing after the war that wasn't bombed out. And with that, we used a lot of that manufacturing and production capability to build out homes. But the way that we did it, or the way that we chose to do, was to give GIs that were coming back basically the ability to buy houses and construct houses out in what we now know as the suburbs. Before then, suburbs were not really a thing. They were smaller towns that were satellites to a city, and they were often called railroad suburbs because that's how they were formed, was usually around a train station. But after World War II, that changed. The car became the primary mode of transportation around the United States. And with that, of course, until quite recently, the main way that we powered cars was with gasoline or oil. So when we started building out these suburbs, it was sort of assumed that there would always be some transportation option, or that the transportation option, that is the car, would remain relatively cheap so that you could get to your home in the suburbs and not have to be paying some exorbitant cost to live in the suburb necessarily compared to living in a city. Cities at the time were not the best, and there are many reasons why we disinvested in them. Otherwise, the main problem with the suburbs is that they were built entirely around the car, which at the time, cars were really cool. My next video, or one of my next videos, will be talking about sort of why the boomer and Gen X generation see the suburbs so much differently than the millennials and Gen Z or younger people do. But we never really ran into this problem through the 50s and 60s, and finally in the 70s, the oil crisis hit. And one thing that's really important, which you have to understand about the United States, is that the suburbs, or the way that Americans save money and build wealth, is through real estate. You buy a house, you get a mortgage, and then you pay off the mortgage over time, and that mortgage eventually becomes the wealth that you have accumulated, or at least you hope. And one of these things that's sort of a given that you are mostly guaranteed is that majority of the places around a city or new suburbs or new developments are relatively easy to get to, and that energy prices, mostly oil, would stay low enough that this is a good investment to buy this house all the way out here because I can drive there and it's not a significant chunk of my income going to just commuting. And so, for the longest time, real estate in the suburbs has remained a great investment because the energy sort of quantification of how to get there was never an issue. Now, the 1970s was the first time that this was actually a problem, and the reaction to this was generally pretty muted. The main thing that the US changed was just regulations on fuel economy and cars, and not necessarily any changes in transportation. There were some build-outs of metro systems that happened around the US that were called the Great Society systems, but those were already predispositioned to happen because of the Lyndon B. Johnson administration and the Great Societies Act. But to see the outcome of this, generally, America and North America have developed quite differently from the rest of the world. Because of the model of real estate that we have adopted and how we have built out the suburbs, we have a very significant different modal share of how people get around and get to work. You can see that in this graph here, how you can see significant amount of the North America or United States gets around via car, and how everywhere else in the world relies on transit, transportation, walking, and biking so much more than we do here in North America. And that's not because we can't do that. It's because for the last 50 years or 60 years, we've built out our entire society in a way where it makes that very difficult. So this goes back to this map, which shows basically all of the transit use in the country via the counties, essentially. And you can see, other than the glorious Republic of New Jersey, there is very few places that actually have a high transit ridership in the US. And this is actually a pretty good way to quantify what feels like a city in the US. If you have a place that has or appears anywhere on this map, that is a good place that would generally qualify as a place that is urban or a place that is a functional city. And this goes back to our original map, or the one that I talked about in the beginning that got me in trouble. I made this map because I basically circled that area, which has a lot of transit use, and basically all of the cities are old, so they all are very walkable and actually have urban fabric, and said that feels like civilization, and then the rest of the country is what fumbled essentially decades and decades of infrastructure building out very car-centric stuff. This map, yeah, it boils stuff down to a very simplistic view of especially how a Northeasterner might see the rest of the country or how it feels. But honestly, it's not that wrong. Like, it's very hard in anywhere else in the country to be like, oh, I'm in this town here and you need to come visit me. And then basically the only way that I can go visit that person is maybe fly to that city and then have to get a rental car and go to their place. And that's the only option, or maybe getting picked up, but the only option is a car. And say that person in that neighborhood loses their car or something of their car breaks down, they have no other option to get to work or no other option to get to a store. And it's obviously way worse in like places like Texas or Florida that are very, very car dependent. And it's just sad. It's sad that we have spent decades and decades of money and investment building out this infrastructure that is so stupidly car-centric that there is no other options. And that's why the Northeast feels so different to me. Most of the Northeast was built before the car, or at least most of the places that matter were built before the car. And so most of the places you're going to be interacting with in the Northeast don't feel like that. There's other options. There's transit. You can generally walk, or at least like things aren't as far away because they were built before the car. And so it just feels different. And it also feels different with the amount of connectedness the Northeast is compared to the other places in the country. Yes, it's more dense here. There's also other dense places in the country. That is a failure. And not only is it a failure in the sense of like, oh, this is stupid that we don't have this and we don't have the money for it. No, TxDOT and Texas have spent billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars over the years, and they're continuously spending more money to build out this car infrastructure, and none of it's going anywhere else. There's no other option. Yeah, so that's why I feel like most of the country has fumbled in some way, and that the Northeast feels like the only place that's like civilization. I often see people shitting on the US and saying like, oh, Europe is so much better and stuff like that. And I think the biggest problem I have with that is that, yes, I do agree. There's many places in the US that you can totally shit upon, and there's not much nuance about it because it does actually suck. But the main thing I have a problem with is someone picking a location and saying, this place sucks. Every place in the US is basically the same. And yeah, I think that what annoys me the most about that is that it's a blanket statement across everything. Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia are like incredible cities, and they are very, very different from what you would experience in like Texas or Florida or any of the Sunbelt places. So how does this map reflect back to the Iran war and this whole stuff with what's going on with oil? Well, a lot of the political outcomes of the last few decades, I would say, yes, are due to a lot of systemic issues with society and American society and media and a lot of the laws that we have made to build up this stuff. But also, we've had this coming, honestly. With how we build out the U.S. and society in the U.S., with it largely being mostly people in the suburbs, that's a very isolating experience. And when you are isolated in a society, you are much more influenced by media and outward voices that you are going to latch onto just to find human connection. You want to find some human emotion, whether it's hatred or outright disdain for others or just something funny. And so a lot of people will end up, when they're driving to work, isolated in their own car. Will, in the past, have listened to talk radio, which generally is more conservative. They'll listen to sports broadcasts, which sometimes are conservative. And nowadays, more podcasts. And what's one of the most streamed podcasts of all time? The Joe Rogan Experience. And so even if it's not on purpose, what essentially suburbanization and isolation does is it makes your population more conservative, because they're not going to interact with people. They're only interacting with cars. And that honestly is a very frustrating experience, driving in traffic. And so you're going to get mad at society. You're going to get mad at where you live. And so when people talk about sort of our conservative buildup in the United States, yes, I would say a lot of it is because of education. A lot of it is because of our media environment. And a lot of it is because of the wealth inequality that we're experiencing nowadays and how housing is so unaffordable. But honestly, a lot of that goes back to just the fragmentation of society and how we cannot sort of collectively come together to fix a lot of this stuff. And the reason, or a large reason for this, in my opinion, is because we are so isolated in how we have built out our modern society. And this seems to reflect on how states seem to vote. Generally, places that have more urban and dense and connected areas seem to be more blue, and the more fragmented, isolated, and new development-based states seem to always be red nowadays. A lot of the conservative leaders know this. They know that transit and dense housing in cities don't vote for them. And they know that being isolated and being exurban, suburban, rural people often do. So even if they are not maliciously against cities in the first place, they become malicious because they know that those places don't vote for them. So they want people to stay isolated in these spots where they know that those people will vote for them. And so we go back to the final map that I said in the beginning. That is correcting a lot of the issues of, or it's slightly more nuanced shit post than the original map. And yeah, I'll put this one out here, but this is the updated version. And enjoy, feast your eyes. I especially like the American Dubai aspect of this map, because if there's anything what Florida feels like nowadays, that's pretty damn accurate. Thank you again, always, to my Patreons for being very patient. I'm getting back in the swing of things, and there's a lot of things in life that I'm getting out of the way. Things were a bit chaotic for a bit, and I look forward to a few things. I'm going to be in Seattle, actually, for the opening of Line 2, so look forward to a video on that. If you are in the Philly area or Northeast, there is a thing called Transit Camp happening this weekend, which I will also have a link to. I don't know how long the registration will stay open for that, but it is this Saturday. Also, if you want to follow or stay up to date on things, we have a Discord where that's originally where parts of this map originated from. And I also have my Instagram where you can see trip updates and stuff like that, which you're welcome to follow below, which I'll be posting Line 2 stuff eventually. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I look forward to see you guys in the next few videos, which will be really fun. See ya!